She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, episodes 1 and 2. I wasn't expecting anything special from She-Hulk, because I haven't really enjoyed much that the MCU on Disney Plus has offered us so far into whatever phase Marvel is saying we're actually in these days. Initially, after watching the first episode, I hated it. That's right, I hated She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, and I wrote a pretty scathing review of it. Then a friend of mine told me that there were some rumors, there was some innuendo, that the first episode was recut to get people interested. Allegedly, we weren't supposed to know or find out how Jen becomes a Hulk until midway or later in the season. And so I thought better of releasing my review. I thought maybe I was being overly jaded and I should give it a second chance. So I opted to rewatch episode 1 and watch episode 2, which made me realize that No, my review stance in this show is in fact trash and didn't get better with a new viewing or another episode. Let's dive right in. The show starts out fast and dumb. We meet Jen, who's a lawyer who has to deal with mansplaining in the office because, of course, like, oh my god, right, sister? And she refuses to listen to or take advice from a man she works with. Okay, it isn't that painfully obvious, but I'm reviewing this after watching the whole episode, and in retrospect, it doesn't seem like she's ignoring this dude because he's arrogant, but that because he's an arrogant man who isn't just yes-queening Jen's entire existence. Am I reading too much into this? No, that's the tone of the show. We then skip to a fourth wall break about how Jen's a Hulk in a lawyer show and you won't watch the fun lawyer show until you know the backstory, and it seems completely out of place and makes me think my friend was right about the episode being recut. I think this is the first MCU fourth wall break that's happened, having only happened in the Marvel but not MCU Deadpool movies where it was interwoven with the comedy. But in She-Hulk, there is no real comedy. We see Jen driving with Bruce Banner because congrats, they're related. And then we get into a car accident after some random, unexplained Sicarian spaceship appears in the road in front of them, in a scene that comes out of nowhere and I suppose might be explained later in the series. After being run off the road, Jen attempts to get out of the car where she cuts herself, and while pulling Bruce out of the car, she gets some of Bruce's blood in her fresh wound, which changes her into a Hulk before she runs off and gets lost in the woods, before I suppose passing out. Upon waking up, she stumbles into a bar all disheveled, and the ladies in the bar, which includes a trans woman and needs to be mentioned because Disney keeps its woke word, are all, oh girl, you deserve better, because of course a man must have done this to her, which isn't what happened, but why correct them? And they literally give her the jackets and shoes off their backs and feet. Because women will totally give you a free makeover and wardrobe when you look homeless in a dive bar bathroom. Girl power. And then to round out the caricature of sexist tropes in this scene, she ends up outside where 3 dudes make the mistake of asking her her name and hitting on her in a too aggressive manner. Uh-oh. Are these dudes going to harass and maybe kill her? She is a frail and defenseless woman, and of course all men bad, and these are men, so they're bad. They didn't take the first hint to go away, like all women do in bars, so they must be vile men with ill intentions. If you're going to play into this dumb yes all men sexist trope, at least do us the favor of casting guys that can look menacing. These dudes look about as scary as a squishmallow. They follow her for about 4 steps and she hulks out and attacks one of them before being stopped by Bruce by the looks of it. The scene's a blur and isn't explained, so who knows how he found her or whatever. But she clearly makes physical contact with the dude's face as a Hulk before being stopped. Oh, hey, unprovoked assault. Nice. As a lawyer, she might want to reflect on how she just used non-defensive force and physically hurt a man for making her emotionally uncomfortable. Nope, she might have died. It must have been justified. Like a frail woman who can't handle stress or navigate society without constant anxiety that overreacts to everything. This is character building, apparently. I also like that the women gave her clothes and then just left her to fend for herself without making sure her ride arrived or that she was safe. Truly inspiring. The next day, Bruce tries to figure out what sets her off, tries to teach her how to be a Hulk and manage the stress associated with it, his literal area of expertise. Her response to these concerns and inquiries is not to listen, but instead to explain managing stress to him, because she does it infinitely more than him. What with, and I wish I were joking, fear and anxiety being the baseline emotions of any woman. My lord, this is the most patronizing and insulting view of women possible, as if it was written by an incel. You'd think that with women always being in constant fear for their lives, they might want to advocate for ways to defend themselves in an equalizing way, but somehow I don't think the writers are ready for that conversation. And I guess it's okay when a woman denigrates your knowledge and experience because, well, womansplaining hasn't been made into a trending hashtag yet. Okay, so then we get to the training, or lack thereof, montage. Now, of course, she's a typical Mary Sue who learns to control her strength and be a Hulk in mere days, something that Banner is still coming to terms with over 15 years, as anything Banner can do, she can do better, unless he's obviously showing off. She doesn't fail or struggle or need to learn anything, and it's just boring. At least the new Hawkeye replacement had to learn and grow and fail and adapt. Kate Bishop respected Clint, and she earned his respect as well. I dare say she was inspired by him. When Jen says that Bruce can't understand her anger and fear, all she's doing is discounting his entire existence, especially the last decade and a half of it. This entitled shell of a woman literally tells her cousin that it's like a woman can just be murdered for being a woman. Her cousin who has almost been murdered. Her cousin who was hunted by the government. Her cousin who risked his own life to save half of existence and lost friends in the process. She's not just a perpetual victim, she's tone deaf and insensitive to her own family. But, of course, because she's a poorly written feminist caricature who might literally be murdered for the sin of being a woman, she leans into the notion that life as a woman is so gosh darn hard, and men clearly have it so easy. Despite her being a terrible relative, during the training and meditation, we get an attempt at pithy banter between two family members we didn't know were related until 5 minutes ago, and the emotional connection feels as fake as the CGI when a Hulk talks in this show. Bruce wants her to learn to find balance in things, but she can have it all. When she goes to leave and Bruce asks her to reconsider, she hits him with a Jeep, which throws him into a pile of rocks, and when she stops and sees that he's okay, he says, "Dick move," and she responds, "I learned it from you." How? When? Is this supposed to be comedic? Did a 5-year-old write this line? He's literally worried about her based on his experiences with what she might expect to go through and trying to figure out how this new transformation problem is going to impact her. Her response to his concern is to punch him in the face because apparently her go-to response to anger, fear, or anything is physical violence. I swear to God, the writers think that violence equals strength and they likely just conflate that with masculinity. Which makes it even funnier when she hulks out, because when Bruce hulks out, he looks like Bruce as Hulk, more or less. When Jen hulks out, she becomes a Hulk and stronger and taller, sure, but her hair gets longer and straightens, and she hysterically becomes what I can only describe as a female Hulk if created exclusively for the male gaze. Laughably, her hair goes from a tight curl as Jen to a fresh salon blowout as She-Hulk. I mean, I guess getting Mia's makeover from the Princess Diaries is just a side effect of fourth wave feminism being exposed to gamma radiation. In the fight, Jen goes toe-to-toe with Bruce as if she'd stand a chance against a bigger, stronger, and experienced Hulk, but of course she can. She has a diminished version of his abilities, but why not ignore that for a dumb fight scene? A dumb fight scene that is weightless and mostly pointless. They could have had her get angry and rush the Hulk and had him put his hand out and hold her head while she swung wildly like a child trying to hit an adult. Have him explain that, yeah, she's tough. Yeah, she's a Hulk. But come on now, sister. Instead, we get CGI muck and no humor until they manage to fall off a cliff and break his bar. She then helps him fix it, which takes us to our second fourth wall break for no reason. These are oddly placed in the series and serve no purpose and really don't enhance the show. They then part ways and she apologizes by way of doubling down on her insults, because she was right and Bruce was wrong about her being able to have it all, I guess. New fourth wall break, back to a lawyer show where she's arguing her case and a villain breaks into the courthouse. For reasons. No build-up, no story, no explanation, just action. Jen takes her shoes off not to ruin them, while opining that she loves her outfit, but proceeds to Hulk out to duke it out with an unknown lady villain, which lasts about 8 seconds. I need to point out that the outfit and shoes lines were there to show that her transformation changes her enough to ruin her clothes in that scene. The shoulder seam of her blazer pops and tears when she transforms, akin to what happened in the Hulk TV show back in the day. This is important later. Jen then grabs her heels and says she's ready to give her closing arguments. Ha! 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 Yeah, that's comedy. Who needs backstory? Who needs explanations? Just fill the show with cringe and whine that the fans of the IP are toxic or some nonsense. It worked with Captain Marvel. Might as well do what you know, right, Feige? This is bad writing. Lazy writing. It's you go girl, hashtag girl boss, and everybody clapped. It's terrible writing that negates the human experience, and it pretends that women are singled out for scorn, abuse, neglect, or shame. It's a lazy victim trope for a lazy victim generation of hack writers who live in a bubble. I mean, I guess people like Jen exist in the real world, but she's a highly educated idiot at this point in her I hope character arc. But somehow I doubt she'll learn or grow as a character because that would require introspection on the part of the writers, directors, and showrunners. This episode wasn't clever or witty or even well put together. It was frankly painful to watch. Now, one of the throwaway discussions in the show with Bruce was about her thinking Steve Rogers was a virgin, so of course they make this the focus of a post-credit scene. Jen's convinced Rogers never had sex. Why we need to discuss this is anybody's guess, but here we are. And when Bruce corrects the record, she exclaims, "I knew it, Steve Rogers," and then gets cut off on the F word, because Disney. This is a great example of not being funny, but also of her lack of intellectual integrity. She's sure of one thing, and then when given information that she's wrong, she doesn't reflect on it or take it in. She immediately makes it part of her personality, because she's always right. She doesn't even do it in a humorous way, which is probably the most aggravating part. So far into the show, there's quite little to like about the character if you aren't a recovering Tumblr addict looking for validation. And things don't get better in episode 2. And as this show isn't shot as separate episodes, I guess we'll just keep going. I wasn't 2 minutes into the second episode before I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because again, it completely lacks self-awareness. Jen, after being dubbed She-Hulk by the press and finding herself at a bar with her best friend, she hears chants of She-Hulk, She-Hulk, and her friend convinces her to give the people what they want. So she changes into She-Hulk, goes in, gets a drink, and complains, "I can't even exist without being a derivative of the Hulk." When she is, quite literally, a derivative of the Hulk. She only exists as a Hulk because Bruce Banner did some genius-level work with gamma radiation and tested it on himself, which created the Hulk. Jen is a Hulk because Bruce's blood got into hers, thereby transferring his gamma-infected blood to her. Let me hammer this point home. She derives her powers from his gamma-infected blood that is gamma-infected because of work he did. Her powers are, by definition, derivative. So no, she cannot and does not exist as a Hulk without being a derivative of the original. Holy hell. This is a troll, right? This show is this badly written because it's 4D chess trying to convince dumb woke feminists that this is for them by selling them the worst caricature of themselves possible. Right? Please? Okay, so back to Jen in the bar. This time when she hulked out, her clothes miraculously become tailored to She-Hulk's figure because, sure. But the key here is that this is clarifying the point that she doesn't even need to be angry to change into a Hulk. At all. She just does it on command because, remember, anger and fear are the baseline emotions of being a woman. That line was put in the first episode to dispense with any struggle over controlling her powers, and because obviously you go girl, anything a Hulk can do, a She-Hulk can do better. Her boss then walks up and asks to talk to Jen as She-Hulk towers over him, and she changes back to Jen, but now she's drunk Jen because something different metabolisms, and she falls off her stool and hits the ground. It's supposed to be funny because drunk girl fall down. Oh man, what a knee slapper. See, she fell down. Let me explain this. Of course, there was no setup given, but fall down equals funny. Ha! Ha 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 ha. Her boss then tells her that she didn't win the case from episode 1 because the jury was biased in her favor for saving them, which I will grant you is one of the few things I found clever. And then she gets fired for somehow being a liability for the DA's office, and she can't find work right away, or rather for a few sad interviews. A big hang-up for me in the show is that there's no sense of time, which is jarring. Was she denied the interviews all in one day? Have weeks passed? So after an undefined amount of time, we see her sad and lonely, joking in bed with her best friend, until she's invited to a family dinner, which of course is bad news to her. And her family is stereotypically pretty awful to her in various ways, except maybe her dad, who she mostly just talks over when he takes her aside to ask how she's doing. I was hoping that the scene in the garage with her dad would allow for a moment of real growth, but no, she's the victim because things aren't going her way for what feels like maybe a few days. I was hoping he'd encourage her to embrace being a Hulk like Bruce has and see where it leads. Why not show her struggle to come to terms with this new persona and have her only be able to get work as She-Hulk and not as a lawyer? After all, people were cheering for her at the bar and somebody gave her free drinks for being a hero, so clearly there'd be some work to be had, even if just construction or something manual. There are plenty of hijinks she could get into going down this path of not being a lawyer for a while. Show her working for an episode or two and learning to humorously become a better Hulk, only to realize she wants to be a lawyer and head back towards that dream. We're somehow supposed to believe that life is hard for her now because she can, at will, transform into a super hot supermodel level superhero. I mean, the first episode bothered to take the time to talk about Steve Rogers' sex life, which means adult conversations are clearly on the table, so why not make a joke about the celebrity endorsement she'd be offered, especially of the adult variety? If you want me to believe that she's having a rough go of it, I need more evidence than the nothing that's been provided thus far. In fact, the only even quasi-evidence we get that things are even remotely tough for her is when she's back at a bar and says, "I'm balling on a budget now," which might imply she had no budget before. Must have been nice. But this moment of, I guess, existential dread, "Oh no, you can't afford another round at the bar and maybe been out of work for a weekend," is interrupted by a job offer. A lucrative one. A dream job, one could argue. And I love that she hasn't had to really struggle, put in any effort, really do anything, but still things turn around for her. She had to suffer through one family dinner that she opted to go to and put off another round after not getting hired right away from a few law firms, and that's all the character growth and we have time for, folks. She's offered the job by the very prestigious law firm that she was about to beat in court from episode 1 before the battle broke out. And she's offered the job because she's such an awesome lawyer who almost beat them had they not had the case thrown out for her saving the jury. And Jen accepts the offer immediately without asking any questions because as a lawyer she knows never ask for or read a contract. And things are so clearly financially bleak, seeing how she couldn't order another round just a minute ago. She wasn't completely inept here, I guess, because she did demand that she be able to hire her own paralegal, who happens to be her best friend. Now, upon arriving for her first day, she's told that she's expected to be at work and in court as She-Hulk, which she would have known had she gotten a written offer. But anyway, she obliges and changes off screen. We need to remember that at the end of the first episode, she said, "I liked this outfit," right before she hulked out and split the seam of her blazer. This time, despite being blindsided by needing to hulk out, nothing happens to her blazer except it ends up fitting She-Hulk better than it does Jen. Jen is a few feet shorter and smaller in every conceivable way than She-Hulk. Bruce explained to her in episode 1 that spandex is your best friend owing to the sheer size differences of normal and Hulk bodies. This was important just one episode ago. But just like Jen's ability to control being Hulk outclasses Bruce's, so does her ability to not rip through her blazer or slacks, with her blazer just looking smaller and better on her, and her slacks becoming tight-fitting capris. The show doesn't even attempt to understand or follow the logic it sets up. Again, this is supposed to be a comedy. The struggle of Jen having to be a Hulk and having to wear different wardrobes constantly is a kind of funny premise that's ignored. Anyways, instead of going for comedy here, the show again plays into Jen's constant pity parties by having her complain that she has to buy an entirely new wardrobe to come to work. Boo freaking who? This is, again, a moment of comedy that's missed. Why not give her a pretty woman moment, since she has so much more money now in this new gig? Use it by having her walk into some classy places only to be scoffed at. Or have her asked to try on clothes in a specific size and ask for the outfits in both sizes, only to be told that she's clearly a size whatever, and then have her hulk out to show the size differences. Have a hairstylist ask her how she wants her hair done and if she has a photo reference, and then say, "I want my hair to look like," and then transform, point to her Hulk hair and say, "This." Hell, have the stylist opine that it isn't possible. Throw a gamma joke in there or something. Anything. And before you act like I'm being sexist here by throwing fashion jokes out because it's a women's show, look at what I'm wearing. If I could Hulk out like her, I'd immediately sign a deal with a couture tailor and have Hulk-specific custom suits made. No question. I walk around my house periodically and go, Shazam. Just in hopes. But this show misses every real shot at comedy we might all enjoy and instead just shows us Jen giving it her all in the victim Olympics. Even getting a lucrative job is something to be pitied over. She went from being a DA working with a dude she loathes to being the head of a new department at a prestigious law firm with a corner office and her choice of paralegal, which means she most likely got her friend a raise as well. Can't be excited about that because, oh noes, they wouldn't have hired me if I weren't a Hulk. Obviously, any good or great lawyer could have been considered for her new job, but Jen was considered because she's a good lawyer and a Hulk. 5 seconds ago, she was complaining about being discriminated against, not in those words, for being a Hulk, as she couldn't get a job thanks to these newfound abilities, and now she's mad that it's benefiting her. This is a feminist who bemoans mansplaining, and you want me to believe that merit is at the top of her list of employment qualifications? Yeah, no. If she'd applied for this position and they hadn't hired her, she'd have cried discrimination and probably would have sued for lack of Hulk or superhero representation at the company. It'd be called something stupid like ability appropriation to have non-powered people representing powered ones. Show me Jen come out against affirmative action or gender quotas, and I might believe that this is something that really upsets her. As it is, they hired her for being able to beat them in court, as a lawyer, because they saw merit in her awesome lawyerly awesomeness, and because she's a Hulk. It's a superhero division, and she's now capable of being a superhero, but she's still the victim. Because why? Oh, because they saw an opportunity to hire a good lawyer who's also a Hulk. I mean, not really though. It's because she couldn't be bothered to ask what the job was before blindly accepting the offer. She was too up her own ass to think through the possibility that it might have something to do with her newfound powers. She again lacks introspection or awareness or any common sense or basic reasoning skills. At the job, while she's being walked to her new office that's so problematic, we get a new unexplained fourth wall break and find out that, unlike in Deadpool, these breaks happen in real time as she misses a conversation she's having with the boss while she's prattling on to us about her latest woe is me-ism. The next set of drama is when she's given the job of representing Emil Blonsky, or Abomination, for hearing about his release as her first case. And it's either take the case or quit the job. Again, this is where a written job offer or contract would have been good. You know, being that she's a lawyer. But instead, oh my god, so unfair. She obviously has a conflict because Blonsky tried to kill her cousin Bruce, but Blonsky signed a conflict waiver, so it's all good. I'm at least glad they covered that bit of lawyerly drama in this supposed lawyerly comedy show. It's again played off like she couldn't have seen something like this coming, but she hired onto a prestigious law firm to work defense counsel and to represent superpowered people in a super-based division of this law firm. That's why she's She-Hulk in these scenes. If she was smart at all, she would have seen this type of eventuality coming. I'd be worried she'd have to represent Loki or something. Alas, no. So before she decides to take the case or quit the job, she visits the prison to go meet with Blonsky. When she visits said prison, they say no superpowers and she de-hulks, and amazingly her clothes fit just fine again. I'm so happy for her. I wouldn't want her to have to buy a whole new wardrobe and plan accordingly. After her meeting with Blonsky, she calls Bruce to once again show how terrible of a person she really is deep down. In explaining the new job and new work she's found herself in and the case she's been assigned, she talks over him while pretending to be calling to make sure he's okay with her defending Blonsky. Instead, he's quick to suss out that she's really just calling to tell him she's already decided to take the job and the case. She barely pretends to care about his feelings on the topic because she's really just calling for validation, which of course he gives her. If she really cared about Bruce, she wouldn't have made up her mind before calling and his opinion would have mattered. If this was a competently written show, Bruce would have had to think on it and we would have to revisit the issue. This is another area with potential drama or comedy depending on how you play it, and character growth, and again, the show just pushes right past it because you gotta keep Jen as insufferable as possible. The call then disconnects as Bruce is seen flying off in the Sicarian ship that drove them off the road in episode 1, because why not? And the episode ends with Jen officially taking the case, only to see leaked footage on the news about Abomination escaping prison at some point to take part in the underground fight club scene against Wong from the Shang-Chi movie. See, it's all connected and they're trying to make it all work somehow. And I'm sure we can trust Marvel to make it make sense, just like they always claim they do. Finally, the post-credit scene is a throwaway to her helping family with mundane tasks and being slightly annoyed by it, because being slightly annoyed is really the default emotion of this character. I know it's supposed to come off as funny, but it just doesn't. The effects look bad, and when she hangs the TV and says, "Don't touch these wires again," it just feels forced, especially because there's no wires in the scene. I guess they just needed dialogue to go with the scene and they let her ad-lib whatever she wanted. Comedy gold! While this episode wasn't as awful and full of overt sexism and feminist cringe as the first one was, it was still trash writing with unlikable characters in a story that could have been shot out by a first-year film student. And it might be stupid, but the thing, besides the painful socio-political tripe, that took me out of the show was how much I loathe the fourth wall breaks. They feel like a lazy wink to the comics without reasons or explanation. And unlike stands of corporate IP, I need a reason why a character can, for the first time ever, break the fourth wall in the MCU. Why can She-Hulk do this? Why her alone? Can Thanos or Groot or Bucky break the fourth wall? And I've already had this conversation with people in the real, and the response is essentially, well, what was the explanation in the comics? No idea. I didn't read She-Hulk. I'm certainly today not going to read 40 years of comics to try to fill in the gaps left by the writers, especially when they pick and choose what is and isn't relevant from those comics. And the reason for this isn't because I'm lazy, it's because the cinematic universe is loosely based on, but mostly just inspired by the comics. The comics simply being used because they're corporate-owned intellectual property. The comics and the movies are not related in any way when it comes to continuity or storytelling. If they can change how Jen becomes She-Hulk, which they did, it stands to reason everything else is up for change as well, and so the original source material ceases to be the source material, and therefore the comics cannot be used to explain what happens in the shows. And the more I think on it, the more it felt like a lazy editing trick to recut the episodes, which would explain my friend's hypothesis. It's something to make it suck less as opposed to something that was interwoven into the context of the show. I mean, maybe they'll explain it later, but I'm reviewing the episodes that are out, not the possibility that they'll make it make sense. Marvel has a bad habit of explaining things in-universe and then blaming the fans for asking. Now, before Disney stans start commenting about Deadpool, yes, those movies have the same issue. Having a character in-universe break the fourth wall changes the dynamics of the universe. It makes us a part of their shared environment. And you can certainly do that with a multiversal, multidimensional framework, which is how the MCU has now been expanded and how things work in the comics. But it's on the writers to make it make sense. The writers in Deadpool just used the crutch of the comics to expect you to go with it as opposed to explaining how it was possible. And it's not just a mechanics thing though, it's also a tonal issue. Deadpool broke the fourth wall, but Deadpool spent his entire 2 movies winking at the audience and not taking himself or the movies seriously. Fourth wall breaks fit tonally in the movie, if not logically. But She-Hulk isn't funny. It isn't winking at the audience. Jen takes herself very, very seriously, and all of her problems, real and imagined, are very real to her and at the core of her existence. I half expected Deadpool to try to jump out of the screen to get away from a bad guy in his movies. At best, I'd expect Jen to show up and scold me for daring to look in her general direction. So while it didn't bother me as much in Deadpool, that's because even Deadpool didn't consider himself a real part of the X-Men universe and was winking at the audience. He says so much when Deadpool opines that the studio couldn't afford more X-Men. It should also be noted that Deadpool sat apart from the main context of the X-Men franchise, as the movie wasn't truly interwoven in the universe. She-Hulk, on the other hand, is a few years away from joining the Avengers, if Mark Ruffalo is to be believed. So if you're going to make this character a cornerstone of your new phase of quickly forgotten consumable slop, you might want to explain how she can do what she can do before she just does it over and over again. As opening episodes, I was actually quite surprised that they were worse than I was expecting. If I wasn't interested in reviewing things, I would have stopped at the first episode and never would have looked back. It was that bad. For the casual audience, I'd say this show doesn't deserve the initial 30 minutes of your time, let alone more. For the casual MCU fan, I'd go so far as to say that it's not just a step, but a whole Hulk-sized leap away from any quality you should expect from a company with the resources of Disney. This was student film level writing, mid to low budget level effects, and written for people who would scoff at the MCU if it wasn't catering exclusively to their taste these days. Long gone are the days of Marvel even pretending to try to bring our favorite characters alive. They have moved on to haranguing us and then shaming us for not liking whatever they shovel onto their platforms. To paraphrase the words of Captain Falcon America, you need to do better, Disney. The only difference is that unlike Falcon, I actually have suggestions to go with my dumb rhetoric, like stop pandering and actually plan out your stories in a coherent way. If you write a comedy, put some things in it that are actually humorous and not just lame and tired sarcasm from an unlikable character. And I know there are people who will love this show and that it wasn't written for me and blah blah blah, and that's fine. But I've watched shows and movies and read books that weren't made with me in mind and enjoyed them. A well-written, well-directed, well-acted piece of art can reach across divides instead of catering to one side of them. All in all, I'm giving these episodes 1 of 5 stars. I hated them, do not recommend. And that's all I have for now. Cheers!